All right, let's talk about the Buffalo Bills. Interesting draft here, as a lot of people were wondering what are they going to do. They obviously traded away Diggs, so they're in a unique situation here. They needed a wide receiver. They got a wide receiver and just one wide receiver. They made some other interesting moves that we will talk about. So first, let's talk about the wide receiver, Keon Coleman. I really like him. I think this was the right move. I think that everyone kind of made fun of the Chiefs or the Bills for letting the Chiefs trade up and get the receiver, Xavier Worthy. But I like Coleman better as a player, to be honest. I think the Bills got out on the right end there, and while there were a couple other receivers to go, sometimes when there's a few receivers in one tier, it's better to just get the last receiver and you trade back and still get the last receiver that's in that tier, because that way you get the extra draft capital and still are getting a receiver that's should be good. I like Coleman a lot. I think he's a really good player. Receivers are hard to evaluate. There is a lot of projection there, so it's totally possible. He might not be a star. Like, again, it's part of the issue with going into the draft needing of receivers. You just don't know who's going to hit. But if Coleman can be like a true outside threat, Curtis Samuel and Matt Collins, Khalil Shakir, those are all guys I like in a specific role. They need an outside guy. Maybe Coleman can be that guy. In a good situation, we'll get a lot of number one looks and gets Josh Allen to throw the ball to. Keon Coleman, a real winner of this draft class for sure, except that he was, a second round pick instead of a first, I suppose. But so not quite as much money, but I think, could end up making more money in the long run being in a good situation, but we'll see. Had a lot of interesting picks. Don't love all of these picks, but I do like some of them. To set up the chart, what you see next to me, is the number all the way to the left. That is when the player was selected. The next number over is when they were projected to be selected, and then their name and their position. So for Cole Bishop, he was drafted 60th, was projected to go 82nd, so it's a bit of a reach on the consensus big board. Cole Bishop, just kind of one of those really good athlete type guys who maybe doesn't quite have the best production in college, and you're kind of just hoping that he can put it all together at a certain point. There is some really impressive highlights. He's a raw player. Like, it is what it is. You're gonna have to coach him up. And the Bills, for all their faults you could say about the coaching and whatever, been very good at coaching guys up. And it is a position of need with safety, as you have Taylor Rapp and Mike Edwards there, but I think you could use another guy. You have DeMar Hamlin there, but I think you could use another guy there for sure. So getting Cole Bishop, it's an interesting move. You didn't have Dwayne Carter, who's another prospect where, so he's a guy who almost the opposite of Bishop in that the physical traits aren't going to wow you. He is 300 pounds, 6'3", so that's good. He has good size for an interior defensive lineman, but isn't going to wow you with the, the traits and stuff like that, but just has like solid production, especially in 2022. That is kind of another thing that hurts his stock, is he was better 2 years ago than he was last year, but maybe you're getting a chance where you can buy low on a player with something like that. I don't know. But I think he's someone who should be able to come in and help out the interior defensive line, which I do think is something they could use improvements on. I think in my round 2 mock draft, I had them going with Johnny Newton, largely just because I like Johnny Newton a lot. And everyone said, "What are you doing? They need a receiver." And I was like, "I know. I like Johnny Newton, and they could use an interior defensive lineman too." Well, they go with this, which is a good idea as well, and they get Carter, who is should be at least a contributor. They then went out and got Ray Davis, which the Bills have spent draft capital on running backs at this point. They've tried to address that position. They do need a guy who can come in. Ray Davis, one of the many running backs who I don't love his blocking. He did not make my top 5 running backs list, but there still is enough upside here and some kind of explosiveness that he brings to the table that I'm still interested in. I think he could be an interesting weapon to some degree. This is right around the time when he was projected to go, and probably when it makes sense to take him. Next up, you have Cedric Van Pran Granger, which that's quite the name to pronounce. Luckily, he's a center, so you don't have to, commentators aren't going to have to say his name too frequently. But yeah, someone who has really good production at the center position. He was a really good college player at Georgia, which is like hey, sometimes it's good to just get a guy who plays football well. He, especially his last year was his best year, but he had other solid years prior to it. It has some physical limitations is the concern that people have with someone like him. Can he be is he a good enough athlete to be a starting center for a football team? But again, it's this thing where it's like, sometimes you get these players that are just like, later in the round, like it's a center, so people don't really, there's not a lot of teams that need a center. It's like, hey, let's just get him. He could be a fine interior offensive lineman, which is another position of need. Even if it's not be a starter, get some depth there can still be important for a position of weakness. So I like that. Then you have Idifuwan Olu Fascio. That's what I'm gonna go with. Man, that's a tough name. Some of these times I butcher easy names. This one's a little bit tougher for me, but I'm gonna try every time. I'm gonna put in my best effort each time trying to get it. Apologies to every guys that I mispronounced their name. He seems like he should be again a solid depth piece. Another guy where gets drafted right around when he was supposed to be drafted. I didn't mention it with the center I talked about earlier. He was actually a bit of a steal according to the consensus big board. This is another you're on the right side of it, but kind of right around there, so you're not none of these insane reaches or anything. Pretty solid, maybe a little bit on the smaller side measurables that just, he's just 6 feet tall, but, has pretty solid athleticism. Could be just an okay, I think, relatively high floor player, which again, there's so many question marks about what kind of player do you want? Do you want to go out and get someone who has potential to be a superstar? Maybe, but sometimes maybe just get someone like this, which is another quality player. You didn't have Javon Solomon, which great name. First off, that's good. Had a career year last year. Definitely had listen, he was Pro Football Focus's 11th highest graded edge rusher out of over 800 eligible edge rushers in college. Now, he played at Troy, right? Wasn't exactly going up against the elite competition that you'll see at other schools, but still, that's nice to see that he had that. I think people are concerned about I'm concerned about this as well. Is his physical traits going to work at the NFL level? He isn't he's a good athlete. He's just not a huge guy at 6'2", 245, and you wonder how much of what he was able to do in college won't work at the next level once it's not just the original, the usual big jump up from college to football, but even more so with someone who went to Troy. That's a fair question, I think, to have right here at this point. Then we have a couple of really interesting picks right here. So you have Tylen Grabble, the offensive lineman who used to play quarterback. Yes, you heard me correctly. So, hey, getting someone who has, you look like his athleticism score, like it's up there with like anyone's basically. That's really good. Bit on the skinny side, 6 feet tall, 300 pounds. Weird to call that skinny, but for a offensive lineman, it is a bit on the skinny side. Definitely is still kind of figuring out how to be an offensive lineman. He was all the way up until college, all the way up until high school, he was a quarterback, and then last year in high school and then in college he played offensive lineman. So definitely figuring it out, but there is reason to believe that maybe there's some higher upside. And hey, not the worst idea in the world. Offensive lineman is a position where you have to be smart, and having a guy who kind of understands how the quarterback position works, we have to see everything, could still come in handy. So kind of interesting there. Then you have Daquan Hardy, which, anytime you see a guy drafted 219 who is guy runs a 4.3, you're wondering, okay, are you a special teams guy? But at the same time, I don't know if that's just what they're doing. I think they maybe believe he could be a guy who could be like a solid nickel corner for them. He's small for sure, 5'9", 180 pounds, like definitely a small guy, but still there is some reason to believe he could be more than just a special teamer, or hey, a good special teamer is not the worst thing in the world either. So, then we have Travis Clayton, who was picked at 221, was ranked 653rd on the consensus big board. That's out of 653 players. He was the last person on the consensus big board. So, hey, you made the consensus big board. We have seen people drafted in the past who didn't even make it. But, interesting. I don't know if we've ever seen someone who was was the last person to make it. Now, it's interesting. He's a a former rugby player, which is interesting. So I mean, I don't know. He's someone he basically has to learn the position. Like that's just the intrigue with Travis Clayton is he someone who's going to I don't believe he's played football. Like he's not gonna get. I don't know much a lot about him, but he's not someone who has like from what I'm seeing, I don't see much of experience whatsoever at the playing football. So I mean, listen, I think about like Jordan Mailata was a guy who like hadn't played football but had such a great frame that the Eagles drafted him, and that ended up working out. Now Travis Clayton is not. That is not to say he'll be Jordan Mailata, but still there is maybe some reason to say, hey, let's just take a flyer at 221. Kind of interesting. So yeah, I don't know, but that's a unique situation. So something that maybe some people know more about than I do, but that's a unique pick as well. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the Bills draft. An interesting draft. A lot of picks, so that's always good. They probably got some depth, which they kind of really need right now. So I think that's probably the most exciting thing about it if you're a Bills fan. But yeah, that's what I think. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from y'all. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.